Overwatch 2 design and balance is a very contentious topic, and something that this channel has devoted a lot of hours into criticizing and praising. Recently, things have been going pretty well, but I still feel like there's some room for growth, especially in the design and balance of cooldowns. Recently, a couple of my viewers sent me a video by Pixel Rory discussing the cooldown design and balance of Overwatch cooldowns and just cooldowns as a whole, and I wanted to take a look at this video on stream, and as is the case with all my React content, not just looking and watching the video, but actually criticizing, providing my own thoughts as well. I really enjoyed the video, so make sure to check out the creator linked in the comments, and enjoy this deep dive discussion on what cooldowns are supposed to be and what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do. Cooldowns are not balance. Okay, let's find out.
Hilarious. Anarchy is in season after all.
Wait, he freaking shot me!
In season after all. Watch this. Well lads, watch this. I'm gonna do something hilarious.
Ah!
Anarchy is in season after all. Here, lads. They're telling me that I can't disturb the peace like this unless I wait 12 seconds between instances? Cooldowns. Fuck them. They ruin everything by slowing things down to a snail's pace. Imagine how great life would be without cooldowns. I didn't think about that part. Despite what the anarchists will have you believe, cooldowns are important, whether in life or games. They set a melodical place to every aspect of gameplay, creating windows of opportunity and moments of weakness to prey upon, and they even add a little management minigame to every character, turning abilities into a resource in and of themselves. If they're so great, then clearly that must be why so many companies use long cooldowns to balance the game out, right? Cooldowns are in a lot of games, but I'm mainly going to be looking at them through the lens of hero shooters. At least the ones that didn't get stabbed in the back. And I have my reasons for this focus, so to start with the main reason that we're here, cooldowns aren't balance, asterisk. Obviously, you need reasonable cooldown length to create a balanced game. Imagine if Tracer Recall had a 3-second cooldown. I don't need to explain these implications any further. Naturally, a character's cooldowns should be tied.
Here are my thoughts on cooldowns. Some things just suck, whether they're on long or short cooldowns. Whether it happens once a fight, twice a fight, 3 times a fight, 4 times a fight. It doesn't fix the fundamental issue with why the cooldown is flawed, because it's not a lot of fun to play with, and it's not a lot of fun to play against. It lacks certain dynamics. Really, I was thinking about this in the shower this morning in regards to Night Rain. All good class design is choice. All good hero design, class design, whatever, game design is choice. An opportunity cost. Not just choice for the sake of choosing, but where there's an actual decision that needs to be made. If there's objectively always the right choice, then you've made a really bad game. Everything about good game and hero design is going, I'm going to do that instead of doing this. But I can see an argument for where this would be good, and maybe it's better, maybe I don't fully understand, and that ignorance or thought process is what makes every character good. Every character needs that. And when you take choice out of characters or designs, you make the character bad. So if a cooldown is flawed because it doesn't introduce choice, or it's not a very hard thing to think about, then reducing or increasing the cooldown doesn't fix the character. All reducing or increasing the cooldown does is make the character a little bit stronger or a little bit weaker. Having a cooldown timer is what makes opportunity cost happen. Let me give you guys an example. If I had on a nade on a 1-second cooldown, there wouldn't be the same choice of how I'd use nade. I'd use nade however I'd want. And offensively, defensively, just use it. I would literally just nade, right? There would be no choice because the cooldown would be too short. You need a choice, or you need a cooldown most of the time to make a choice. Now, there are certain exceptions to that rule. For example, Mercy Beam does not have a cooldown, but you choose between damage boosting or healing. You cannot do both, and that choice is the fundamental part of her character design. But for things that are very, very powerful, putting them on a cooldown puts you at certain crossroads, at intervals, for you to make an important decision that will have impact on the fight. However, increasing the cooldown as a method of weakening a character because a cooldown is frustrating to play against may make the cooldown or frustrating instance happen less often, but it doesn't stop it from being less frustrating. Nade's the big one that I've been very frustrated about recently, because nade it can be a frustrating cooldown to play into, but it is a very important part of Ana's kit. And instead of addressing the root issues or the strength of the issues that people have problems with on a nade, they made it longer, which made those windows of vulnerability that were already there with a 12-second cooldown or an 11-second nade cooldown. The windows of vulnerability were already there. That's more than long enough to have a meaningful choice with nade. But they exacerbated it to such an issue without actually addressing the root cause. If you hate nade before nerf, you hate nade after nerf, and nothing about nade has really changed that. But as an Ana, there are more often often where that window of vulnerability feels so incredibly long that it feels like I don't want to use the cooldown at all. Another great example of this is Life Grip, right? Where Life Grip's cooldown is so incredibly long, I feel like if I use it for decent value, that it's not good enough. I have to save somebody's life or it's not worth using the cooldown at all. And that means that I'm waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, not using the cooldown because the opportunity cost is so high. When you make the cooldown so low that there is no choice, you have a bad game design, hero design. When you make the cooldown so long that you're terrified of making the wrong choice and being stuck with it for an extended period of time, you have also made bad game or bad hero design. The same thing happens with Baptiste's Lamp, Life Grip, any long cooldowns, Doctor Strange's Teleporter. It's not an accident that those cooldowns are often not used or used cautiously, especially by low and mid-rank players, because the fear of misusing such a long cooldown prevents them from using it at all, which is poor game design. You should have a cooldown window that makes it so that the resource actually matters, that it is an actual choice, but not so long that there is an overwhelming terror of misusing the cooldown entirely. There is a nuance there. Does that make sense? So we want cooldowns to matter, but not be so incredibly important that it scares you from using them, because that is bad game design, because using your abilities is fun. Making those choices is fun. And this is not just about Overwatch or hero shooters. This is also, you could make some very legitimate criticisms about Night Rain, who have similar issues where it comes to making certain choices that you're locked into for the entire round, and they may or may not pan out. So you are terrified of making an aggressive choice because if it doesn't work out, you're screwed. There's a lot of punishment for more out-of-the-box choices. It's much better to go safer. Let's keep going here. So that's the reason I like to do this with the React content, guys, is I'm not farming this guy for views, you know? I want to give my thoughts and see what he thinks.
To the strength of the ability. But lads, we need to have some limits. This is my...
Do you see, this is the thing, right? The other thing with cooldowns as well is you have a character that's unbelievably, overwhelmingly unbeatable in a certain instance and completely weak afterwards. Those variances in gameplay can leave you feeling either helpless playing into them or helpless playing them, depending on the window. And it is a balance that you have to find. There should be windows of vulnerability, there should be windows of strength, but you can't have all or nothing, because that removes choice. That removes balance. That's what balance is.
Ability. But
everything you're saying applies to chess. Yeah, it applies to any freaking game. The best games that you have ever played, whether sports, board games, basketball. Do you pass or do you shoot? Or do you dribble? There's advantages to all of them. Shoot means that you just get the shot off right away. There's no hesitation. The more shots that you get, the more opportunities that you get. That's how you score points, after all, right? When you dribble, you are looking to improve your position at the risk of not even being able to take a shot. When you pass, you are looking to improve your position to take a shot at the risk of not being able to take a shot at all, because it's a turnover. So every choice that you make has a consequence. When you pass or you dribble, you're not making points. You might be improving your chances of making a point, but you're also risking getting turnover. So you have to decide what makes the most sense. If the answer is obvious, your game sucks. That's why so much of Marvel Rivals cooldown design is really bad, because you have these massive kits with mini cooldowns that either don't do really anything at all or only have one choice. So there really isn't any thought into how or when to use them. It's just the same formula over and over and over again. That's not just a Rivals problem. Overwatch has many of the same problems as well, but I find it to be a lot more prevalent in Rivals.
We need to have some limits. This is my main point and main idea. Giving an ability a long cooldown to match its power, while a sound concept, isn't much of a sound practice. The best way to look at it is a real example, and just recently Overwatch had a textbook demonstration of it with their newest DPS, Freya. Now Freya, honestly, incredibly well-designed character. She's just overbearing right now. Players were bad at her during her trial, she got overbuffed, and now she's on top of the meta. How do you fix this? It could be a damage nerf, but I would say reducing the time she spends in the air is the way to go, since half the cast just can't interact with her most of the time. The main issue isn't her mobility frequency, though she definitely is a little bit too mobile. The big issue is that she has an easy to execute, consistent one-shot combo on most of the cast, combined with having some insane mobility uptime. So how was this addressed in a recent patch? They added 0.5 seconds to her dash cooldown, a 14% increase. And to be fair, this
I don't necessarily agree with this one. I think that the point, remember the balance, if dashes are permanently available, then it's not really a resource that you need to manage. It's not really a choice. Of course you're going to use your dashes. You have it. You'll have them back in 2 seconds anyway, right? I'm obviously using a bit of hyperbole here, but You get what I'm saying? I think that Freya's cooldowns on her dashes were so short that it wasn't a meaningful choice consistently enough. There wasn't enough opportunity cost. There wasn't a downside to using them. That's not exactly true. And I think for a dash, it would be somewhere in that 3.5 to 5 second range for it to feel like a commitment without feeling like, oh, I'm scared to use them, if that makes sense. I think the thing that I didn't like as much was the updraft. I think, well, I don't know if I disliked it. It was something I need to experiment with a little bit more.
Was needed. Compared to her trial state, the cooldown is still shorter, and back then it was too long. But regardless, this is what I mean by cooldowns aren't balanced. Just increasing the length of time it takes for a character to use their ability that is clearly proving too strong does nothing but slow down their gameplay and makes them less enjoyable.
Maybe. Remember, choice is what's fun. If all you're doing is you're spamming bolts the entire time and there's never a window, like tempo is fun. Tempo is fun. Uptime and downtime is fun. The question is it too short? Is it just all gray? Let me give you guys an example. What's the fundamental of cooking? I don't know anything about cooking, but what is a good meal? What's a good meal? A good plate of food. What do you got? You got your protein, you have your salt, you have your spice. It's contrast, right? That's why people like peanut butter and chocolate. That's why people you don't have chocolate and more sugar on top of the sugar. There's a mixture, there's a contrast. There's a from A to B and hot to cold. It's the contrast that complements. And so when your experience is very even, there's never any spikes in value, and because you're always available to do the same thing, it feels very, I'm gonna say it, Rivals-esque, right? There's a very always doing something, but nothing ever really feels that meaningful. So contrast is important here, and I think that's why having cooldowns that actually matter makes sense. If Tracer had half a second or a full second shorter on each blink, there would be no concept of blink management. There would be no feeling of, oh, I popped off and I used my It would just be you always have the blinks, and so you're just always moving infinitely, right? There would be no opportunity cost. So I agree with the point, but I only target nerfs like this when they're on the extreme. When you nerf on an aid from 12 to 14 and you introduce paralysis into the character. If you were to buff Freya to go from 3.5 to 2.5 seconds on her dash, it would just be more spamming shots, but maybe not actually addressing what the character would need if she were to need a buff, which she doesn't, right? But you get what I'm saying, right? So it's always it's looking at the extremes. Life Rip is too long of a cooldown. It doesn't address what's wrong with the cooldown.
Not tackling the actual issue people are having with them. Sticking with Overwatch, another, honestly clearer example of this happened a little while ago with Ana, where they increased the cooldown of her nade by 2 seconds, which in a 5v5 queue brought it up to 14 seconds from 12, or a 17% increase. I did just say it, but I will repeat myself. Increasing the cooldown of a powerful ability does not nerf it just makes it less fun to use. Because
True. Crucial that he said powerful ability. It's generally important that with powerful abilities that they're only, this is the other thing we didn't talk about, is the frequency of how often that they're used. Nade in fights is often only going to be used once, maybe twice. With 14 seconds, that's kind of still the case, right? It didn't really significantly, it does, but it's the frequency of how it happens. It's the same thing with Life Grip. You make Life Grip a longer cooldown, it doesn't matter. It's still only going to happen pretty much once a fight. You get what I'm saying? So the problem with the anti-nade is that there are certain situations where it feels bad, it feels good, but the situations where it feels bad happens. It was a neutral change is the problem with the on-a-nade change. Yeah, what would I change about nade? What do people not like about nade? Anti-effect? Maybe the amount of damage it does. It's spammability on tanks. Okay, so we start there. How very difficult can be to push an Ana because of how good nade is defensively, because of how much it heals and how much it damages. So it's either it's too good of a dueling cooldown up close, or it lasts too long, or it's too dangerous on tanks from far away. So you start there. I actually don't think you would change anti-nade fundamentally. To be honest with you guys, skill issue. I think there's a high risk, high reward with the character. Then there's a sense of bias in that from my end, but at the same time, that's where you'd start. That's where you would start. You don't start by going, we make it longer cooldown, because it's still going to do the same thing. So you have to be really careful with this. There's a balance. Should anti-nade be 9 seconds or 8 seconds or 7 seconds? No, I don't think so. I think you'd have it multiple times. It would happen way too often in a fight. You'd use your nade aggressively, and then you'd only have about 3 or 4 seconds to dive the Ana. That's not enough of a vulnerability window for how strong anti-nade is. And yet, if you nerfed anti-nade so that it would earn its 7 or 8 second cooldown, well, then it wouldn't just feel as impactful. There's a balance here. Should Tracer's blinks go further? Should they have a damaging aspect? but there's only 2 of them. No, I feel like the whole point of the blink is supposed to be a little bit weaker, but it's specifically used for mobility. So what's an appropriate cooldown for a weaker ability? Lower, probably, which is why I think Freya's dashes should be relatively low cooldown.
I think on an 8, taking 14 seconds to come back instead of 12 is a big killer to its strength. It's just annoying when playing as Ana because your uses end up limited. You want to save the ability for the perceived most optimal moment. Plays that involve less risk, like saving yourself or a tank, rather than plays that could actually end up having a higher impact, like nading the enemy support to help with a dive, or even throwing it out for your ulting DPS to keep them alive mid-fight while you reload. Remember, your abilities are effectively a resource, and what is a tendency that people have when faced with a resource which is limited? They hoard it. You see it most commonly in games that have consumable items. Think Eaters in Final Fantasy, SP Restoration in any SMT game. But honestly, any resource in any game that could be considered rare or limited counts. I mean, even in hero shooters, the easy example is ultimates. You only get your ult a few times per game.
Holy crap, that's actually a great example and something I did not think about. Ultimates, that's why people hold ultimates for so long. Now, it's hard to balance around that because ultimates are by design extremely potent, but also if you think about what are the best ultimates in Overwatch, it's the ones that are the most consistently usable. The ultimates that don't have very clear uses are the ones that are held the longest. Yes, very good. Very good
point. A lot of players saving their ultimates for the game's second sequel when facing this rare resource. The exact same concept applies to abilities that end up having too long of a cooldown, effectively abilities that are made to be too rare. And on that, if an ability is too powerful that the only way to balance it is a long cooldown, we probably have an ability that's too powerful.
How many of you guys have played Night Rain? There's a random passive drop, I'm making this up, random passive drop that if you beat certain bosses, even better, if you beat random mobs, just a mob, just a random little soldier, there's a 1 out of 1,000 chance that you get double your max HP. Double your max HP. Good game design, bad game design. Bad or good? What do you guys think? And why?
In general, I mean, Baptiste's Immortality Field is a 25-second cooldown, and it took years for it to get to a point where it can be described as balanced, and even then, players still dislike this ability, and I'll come back to this in a while. As a general rule, I would say that a strong ability should only be seen once or twice per fight, with some flexibility for pre- and post-fight uses, with the cooldown reflecting this. Depending on the character and the general pace of their gameplay, taking their strong ability and allowing for it to be used in pre-fight skirmishes, and letting that cooldown come back online in time for the actual battle should be the aim in most cases. And while I am focusing on hero shooters, the general idea would apply in other genres that feature cooldowns. Take MOBAs, the genre that inspired a lot of hero shooters. Obviously, longer cooldowns are at play, simply because the time to kill in these games is far longer than a shooter, and in general, there is just a higher power level. For example, Warwick E, it's his strongest ability, aside from his ultimate, and it starts as a 15-second cooldown because a damage reduction and fear in one ability is extremely powerful in early game fights, so unless used early in one, it probably won't have the time to come back online during it, but as points are put into it, it goes down to 11 seconds to match the power of the game at later stages, where the...
You'll notice that like the ultimates and how they're function are more of a embracing the hero fantasy for a really big explosive moment with a long downtime, but it doesn't compromise your general neutral engagement. Right? It also depends on how the frequency of how often engagements happen as well.
The time to kill begins to decrease. So this cooldown is always matching the power level while still allowing it to be used before either side commits to the fight to try and gain some amount of an advantage.
Because I do think it's important that you contextualize what is the design of the game, then what is the good game design within that system. You can't say all long cooldowns are bad. Well, what about ultimates? What is the purpose of an ultimate? How does that complement the playstyle of how something is supposed to be played, right? I think you always try to measure something from the context of what is it trying to accomplish.
I mean, there are even fighting games with cooldowns, but there was a large asterisk next to all of those words. Take any Smash game which has staling, where repeated use of the same move will weaken its damage and knockback, encouraging players to use other moves instead of spamming their strongest one constantly. Absolutely not a cooldown in the traditional sense, but it's bordering on it. There are other workarounds to implementing these strong ability cooldowns as well. Certain abilities have the cooldown start once it's pressed, instead of waiting for it to finish. Take Soldier's Heal or Hammond's Shields, so the effect of a longer cooldown isn't felt as much. And there can even be exceptions to this still. Staying in Overwatch, you have Lifeweaver's Pull, currently at 18 seconds, and I do not see this ever going below it, even though that makes it an ability you will not see more than once per fight, or even before the fight, mostly for the mental sanity of players on both teams, because all players in the lobby
you guys
hate
know what I
Lifeweaver
think about
Pull.
that.
As cool as that ability is, it's a mess. But there is another angle that cooldown-based balancing can take, which I'll just preface, I don't like this one either, but it's not something seen in Overwatch, so we need to move over to pretty much the only other hero shooter that matters in the current space, Marvel Rivals. Lads, I love Paladins, but let me tell you, a corpse can always be fresher. So what is Marvel Rivals' approach when it comes to cooldowns? Put simply, you have more buttons to push, so you'll push those buttons less often. While in Overwatch, 12 seconds is around the upper limit when it comes to cooldown length, in Rivals it nearly seems like the average. Now, a lot of the time, it's not some massive problem and is quite simply warranted. Take Cloak and Dagger and their form switching. If their cooldowns were too short, it would be way too hectic swapping between them constantly, and all element of depth to their kit would be removed. And for the strength of their abilities, their cooldowns make perfect sense anyway, they don't need to be touched. And I do need to stress this, I'm not trying to imply that longer cooldowns should be eradicated, not at all. But there is definitely a point where it just feels off. I mean,
Correct.
take one
It's
of
the
my
nuance
personal
we talked
favorites,
about.
Winter Soldier. His dash is 12 seconds. Now it does have a solid damage and more notably CC.
I hope that he goes with the E, because I didn't believe it when somebody told me that they gave Winter Soldier 2 E's. I think that was such a dumb decision. His E was already a relatively short cooldown, but there was still an opportunity cost of using it on the front line for the AoE slow, where you would be just slightly more vulnerable to targets and 1v1s, because it was a decent damage, pretty good AoE, pretty good slow, help you win duels. So using it on main did mean that you're more vulnerable to duels. So again, opportunity cost, choice. It's about recognizing which situation. Then they gave him 2 E's. Well, 2 E's is not as useful in a 1v1 because you don't need to double stack the slow. So you just basically would spam it and you'd always have one available if you ever get dove. There was no real, it significantly reduced the amount of cooldown management that he needed. I hope he goes into this, because I did not like this, and this is the character that I played in Rivals. I love this character. I love the cooldown management of Winter Soldier. I know there are aspects of his kit that were tough to play into, I'm not going to lie, but I like the fact that I needed a cooldown if I get dove. So I had to manage, do I want to bully tank line, or do I want to control my cooldowns to be able to defend myself versus divers? 2 of his circle blasts, the slow and damage
Component to it, but several times while playing him, it just feels like it should be back up. And that's ignoring how it doesn't have it, but 12 seconds. Now it does have a solid...
Oh yeah, I agree. Yeah, and they made his uppercut 12. I don't like the uppercut being 12 seconds. I think it's too long. I would have left the E with 1 charge and made uppercut like 10 or 9, because it also means that he can't... lowering his mobility cooldown would have made him to have more choices with positioning as well, which I felt was really lacking with Winter Soldier. They really leaned into like the tank buster anti-dive dynamic without really giving him any sort of mobility at all, because it's on a freaking 12-second cooldown. And so they instead just leaned into even less cooldown management, even less choice, by not changing his shift cooldown, but adding another charge of his freaking AoE damage slow. Yes, no, I know that they made uppercut 12 seconds. Maybe he's talking about the hook then, but I always hated the uppercut cooldown. Personally, I always hated the cooldown.
Solid damage and more notably CC component to it, but several times while playing him, it just feels like it should be back up.
But yeah, I think increasing the cooldown of hook is probably the same thing. It's still going to be really cancer to get hooked as a tank. So maybe they should have reduced the range of it. Maybe they should have reduced the CC lockout of it. I'm not sure of all the components of the hook, but it probably should have kept to similar cooldown, but have something that involves more risk for the Winter Soldier. Maybe using hook doesn't give you overshield, so you're not it's an actual risk to hook somebody because you might get blown up. Yeah.
And that's ignoring how it doesn't actually let Bucky reach.
I'm also going to say one more negative thing. I love the fact that people were saying, "Oh, when I've really enjoyed, not really enjoyed. That's too negative. It's been morbidly amusing. I'm going to be honest, to watch some of the positivity around things like hook and Rez with Adam Warlock and Winter Soldier be like, oh, how did Marvel Rivals are geniuses? And Hawkeye. I remember Hawkeye. Oh, they solved one shots, geniuses. And now they have the same complaints. Give it like 2 or 3 months, people have the same problem with hook, the same problem with one shot, the same problem with Rez. Crazy, man.
Most high grounds, so you'll try to use it for mobility, fail just because it won't give you the boost that you need, and then you're stuck without it for the next 12 seconds.
So he is talking about uppercut.
Or we can go with an even more egregious example. Why not take a look at Moon Knight and the 15-second cooldown he's got on his grapple?
Holy frick.
You know, this has nothing to do with balance or the power of the ability. This just makes no sense. Moon Knight should be jumping across the battlefield, constantly attaining different angles, and this just limits him. This style of cooldown is seen not across...
Dude, right? But see, this is also the problem. My problem. I don't want to get into Rivals too much, but like it feels like it feels like a conscious decision. They don't want the Moon Knight to be taking space. They want these DPS to just turn their brains off and spam down a choke, or they're going to hard flank. There's no in between with Rivals, man. That's why I could not stand some of the characters in that game. There's no in between. You either don't take any angles, or you do nothing but hard flank backline.
across the entire cast, but the majority of it. Rivals characters tend to have a lot of abilities, and by extension, longer cooldowns on them. Like I already said, it's a more buttons to push that are pushed less often deal, when, in my opinion, less buttons to be pushed, which are pushed more often, is a more interesting gameplay loop and philosophy. At the end of the day, less is often more. And because Rivals has these longer cooldowns, the more interesting and fun parts of characters can't be accessed for particularly long intervals. Luna Snow Beams, Loki Clone Swapping, Emma Frost Diamond Form are all 15-second cooldowns. Now it can be argued that they need to be that long in order to actually be balanced. What have I been talking about for the last 9 minutes? If an ability is too strong and can only be balanced with a long cooldown, the ability is probably too powerful, lads. I mean Iron Man Overdrive, Loki's Stones, Rocket's Revive, Adam Warlock's Soul Bond. All of these have such long cooldowns because they're such powerful abilities. But if they're so powerful, why are they basic abilities? I'm not trying to say that all cooldowns should be lowered so that cooldown management becomes easier. That would be beyond stupid. And even if these were brought down, your cooldown management would still be important. I'm just saying that using cooldowns as the final barrier of balance is not the way to go. Like I have said so many times already, if an ability is too strong, a long cooldown will not prevent it from being too good. And even with the longer cooldowns, the lower frequency of it happening doesn't make anyone feel better. Strange needs his portal to get some level of value, or else all he's done is reduce the lifespan of his CPU. And this has done absolutely no favors when it comes to the fact that the ability just goes on cooldown if you cancel it. So if you're trying to set up a little portal cheese at the beginning of a game and move just a bit too far down the map, 3-minute cooldown right there. It's not fun to the user to have an ability that only gets used once every other fight. Look no further than Mercy Resurrection. If you're trying to play Mercy at all optimally, you cannot be rezzing whichever soul
bad
you see
iteration.
first. All you will do is feed up.
What was the stat? Was it Mercies generally get 3 reses per 10? Or something like that? I think it was something like that, which was crazy. That is crazy. 3 per 10? 3 reses for 10 minutes. Terrible, man.
Adult charge. We've all seen or even been rezzed on tank in a 1v5 situation, resulting
the ability
in
doesn't
immediate death
exist
and who knows
for
how
most
much
fights
to the enemy team, which means resurrection as an ability is one that you will only see 4, 5, maybe 6 times per 10 minutes, effectively meaning that half of Mercy's kit isn't being
I'm pretty sure SkiSD said it was a lot lower in higher ranks, so I'm not sure the exact numbers, but yeah.
For the majority of the game. Cooldown management is certainly a valuable and fun skill to have present in a game, but when you end up with an ability that barely gets consistent use, it only hampers and limits the experience of the player while removing the chance for the cooldown to actually be managed in an active way. And this does go the complete opposite direction. When a cooldown is so short that players never consider when to use it and just throw it out as often as they can, it just ends up kind of bland. Look at old iterations of Zenyatta's Discord Orb. You could just throw this onto anyone. No cooldown, any target, as many times as you wanted. Once they added the inability to apply Discord to a target who just removed it for 6 seconds, a significant amount more thought went into when to use Discord instead of just having it on the tank 24/7. Or on the other side.
I've always been kind of like on the fence of this one. I played a lot of Zen, and I don't know, man. There's certain characters I think that should be able to get away with having this kind of stuff, but I honestly can't really tell you why. I haven't thought about it enough. I don't know why. It's for my instinct. Right, this is not anything proof or science or anything. So I have nothing outside of what I can tell you how I feel. How I feel is that I always felt Zenyatta is more about where you're placing your cooldown and not how or when you're using it more. And I also liked it because it allowed you more brain space to focus on the difficulty of his mechanics and the punishment of his rotations and how fragile you were. But I don't really. There's probably flaws with that. I'm probably not able to putting my finger on it really quick. It's a fair point, and I'm not really disagreeing with Pixel Rory here because I haven't really got my thoughts fleshed out here, to be honest with you guys.
Side of this same short spectrum, Tracer Blinks being 3 seconds.
Pat,
While yes, that is a really short cooldown, it also fits perfectly with her fast-paced nature. Duels with the Tracer happen in just a few seconds,
And the other thing to keep out with Tracer is that you need like 2 or 3 blinks at least to win most duels. So it's when you talk about blink being 3 seconds, what you're really talking about is a 9-second cooldown to be able to get him back. Not literally because you start regenerating them as you go on, but you are talking about a longer cooldown to regenerate those.
So if a Tracer wastes all her blinks, that effect will be felt because of how squishy she is. If an ability and its cooldown can only ever be used in macro and never in micro, it should probably be reconsidered. coming back to Bap's immortality field that I mentioned near the beginning, you're more than likely only seeing one of these used per fight, but that infrequency doesn't change the fact that it can be immensely frustrating to play into, and even for the Bap player it won't be the most engaging, as they will naturally hold some level of bias to save the cooldown for a better play. Or better yet, look at another fruity Overwatch character I've already mentioned in Lifeweaver and Grip, the exact same idea applies. There are possible saves for this that would somewhat allow for the power and long cooldown to stay, while giving the player a little more action and use cases for their ability. Imagine if Life Grip had its cooldown reduced if being used on a...
You notice that the tricky thing with Life, Grip, and Lamp is not just the cooldown, but how infrequent, unflexible those cooldowns are as well. There isn't really any opportunity choice as much because there aren't really many different ways to use those cooldowns. In fact, the vast majority of my coaching with Lifeweaver and BAP is finding ways to force value out of those cooldowns. Like you have to go unnaturally aggressive or, yeah, so anyway.
On a full HP target, which would then allow it to be used for positioning without feeling like a waste.
Wait, what do you say?
Used on a full HP action and use cases for their ability. Imagine if Life Grip had its cooldown reduced if being used on a full HP target, which would then allow it to be used for positioning without feeling
he
like
said
a
the
waste.
thing.
This is another method to offset the limitations of a long cooldown, giving players
I feel like
methods to
Emperor
lower
Palpatine.
themselves or conditional cooldowns, but it's an extreme case-by-case basis.
Guys, I am freaking Chancellor Palpatine. I've been psyoping Overwatch for 4 years. You guys don't even know. The angles, I saw somebody in chat earlier that said, yeah, coach said that so-and-so Overwatch is just timing and map control. I'm like, yes, good, yes.
Example of it in action
Yes,
is Overwatch
dynamics,
Their drill dash
yes,
cooldown has double reduction when underground, effectively halving it, allowing it to be used for mobility and disruption without feeling like it should be
Papaldo,
saved for
that's
when
cursed.
Venture is above ground for better.
Wait.
Their drill dash cooldown has double reduction when underground, effectively halving it, allowing it to be used for mobility and disruption without feeling like it should be saved for when Venture is above ground for better damage.
Good. That was also me. That was also me. Oh.
Referring to rivals, these long cooldown theories get worse with team-ups. Most tack on an extra ability to one or more characters, which nearly always have a 20 to 30 second cooldown between them and are often incredibly powerful abilities. So even though Iron Man would probably only get one Gamma Overdrive per fight, that doesn't make it any more fun to deal with as an enemy. And as the Iron Man player, being locked out of your strongest state, or better put, your most fun state for 20 seconds, every time you use it, it doesn't lead to the most fun decisions on when to use it. Although that team-up literally just got removed as I wrote this. And all this has been ignoring the issue that I have with a lot of team-ups just being bloat to already bloated kits, but that's a different discussion entirely, and either way the ultimate combo ones are cool, these ones can stay. Like all things in a game, cooldowns are a balancing act, but I'd argue they're even more difficult than most. Too short and not a single thought is ever put into when the ability is used. Too long and you have the reverse. Too much thought gets put in on
That's
when
exactly
to use
what
the
I
ability
said.
that is
I love that.
probably too
Such a good
powerful for its
point.
own good. They demand to be in the goal.
And I'm not taking credit for that because I don't think I've ever said that.
Needed to them at times, depending on how a character is doing in any given moment, they should never be the primary balancing method you use to rein people back in.
And while I was talking about cooldowns, the government imposed a new one on me. I am in prison!
It's a good video. Really a good video. I thought it made some great points there.